Welcome all. Thank you for your patience. Welcome to the Cancer Research Institute Cancer Immunotherapy and You webinar series. Today is Tuesday, June 19th, 2018. And the title for today's webinar is Talking to Your Oncologist About Cancer Immunotherapy. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our generous sponsors who have made this webinar series possible. That includes Bristol Myers Squibb, with additional support from Regeneron, Sanofi Genzyme, and Adaptimmune. My name is Brian Brewer, and I'm Director of Marketing and Communications at the Cancer Research Institute, a nonprofit organization founded 65 years ago with the singular mission to fund life-saving immunotherapy research to develop treatments that harness the immune system's power to fight all cancers. This work has contributed to the development of immunotherapies for a variety of cancer types, and we present this webinar series to patients and caregivers to help them understand what immunotherapy is and how it is different from other treatments, to provide information on the latest developments in research and treatment, and to connect patients to immunotherapy clinical trials. CancerResearch.org features these and other resources for patients and caregivers as part of the Cancer Research Institute Answer to Cancer patient education programs. Here you can read or watch stories shared by others who've received immunotherapy treatment, register for one of our immunotherapy patient summits, browse our entire library of past webinars featuring the world's leading immunotherapy experts, access information on other resources including treatment, emotional support, and financial assistance, and find help locating an immunotherapy clinical trial. June is Cancer Immunotherapy Month. During the month, we've planned 30 days of educational content, including coverage of the latest breaking news from the world's largest oncology conference, immunotherapy patient video stories, our Wear White Day social media campaign, and more. Check out all the exciting activities at cancerresearch.org/June. And on Saturday, June 30th, we'll be kicking off our Immunotherapy Patient Summit in San Francisco. At this free half-day event, we connect patients and caregivers with immunotherapy experts to discuss the latest advances in research and treatment. Other summits are scheduled for New York City, San Diego, and Houston, and we have a live stream broadcast as well. If you're unable to attend one of those markets, go to cancerresearch.org/summit to learn more. Now it's my pleasure to introduce today's speakers, Ariella Chivil and her oncologist, Dr. Alexander Lesokhin. Ariella was diagnosed with Hodgkin lymphoma in 2010, just before her junior year of college. After completing 14 different treatment protocols, each with its own set of side effects and complications, Ariella and her doctors decided to try something new, a clinical trial of the immunotherapy nivolumab. Her first scans after beginning the trial showed a marked reduction in her tumors. In May 2016, nivolumab received FDA approval for the treatment of Hodgkin lymphoma. Today, Ariella is off treatment and enjoying living and working in New York City. Dr. Lesokhin is a hematologic oncologist at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center who specializes in treating people with blood cancers such as lymphoma and multiple myeloma. Specifically, he's focused on developing innovative ways to use the immune system to treat cancer. To this end, he's currently leading 2 phase 1 clinical trials that are evaluating different immunotherapies in patients with advanced blood cancer, and is also co-investigator in 2 other immunotherapy clinical trials. In addition to his clinical immunotherapy expertise, Lesokhin's laboratory research aims to characterize a subset of immune cells called myeloid-derived suppressor cells and how they influence the development of adaptive immune responses against tumors. Well, to no further ado, Ariella, Dr. Lesokhin, it's an honor to have you both here with us today, and welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
All right. So let's begin. Ariella, why don't you tell us what was going on in your life when you first met Dr. Lesokhin, and what was this experience like for you?
Sure, absolutely. So I met Dr. Lesokhin in 2013 after I had exhausted all treatment options available to me at that time. I had been diagnosed in 2010, and I had gone through about 14 different protocols before meeting Dr. Lesokhin. Including a pretty noxious chemotherapy protocol called CMOP, which had been marketed to me as a last resort. When the morning I met Dr. Lesokhin, I had commuted all the way from New Jersey to the Upper East Side about 12 hours after returning home from a 2-week hospital stay. I had just been in the hospital due to lymphoma-related complication that required bowel surgery. liquid diet. And I had just learned through some scans related to this surgery that my cancer that we thought had been eradicated by CMOP, this last resort drug, had in fact come back and was growing really quickly. When I showed up that morning after being in the hospital for 2 weeks and feeling really weak, I was like a shriveled, bald, green tin shell of myself. So I really appreciated the warm, comforting vibe that Dr. Lesokin's team put out there, because I, definitely needed it after the whirlwind I had been through.
Dr. Lu Soakin, what was Ariella's state of health like when you first met her, and what was that experience like for you?
I think one word that would summarize it would be horrible. I think she was quite ill at the time, as she so eloquently described just now herself. It was pretty clear that her disease was rapidly progressing, and that it was affecting sort of vital organ function in some ways. And in many ways, it was rather, I think, fortunate and maybe lucky that that her organ function remained good enough for her to be eligible to enroll in a clinical trial. I think it speaks a lot to the human condition and capacity to tolerate significant, challenges to physiology.
So Ariella was enrolled in a clinical trial testing an immunotherapy, as I mentioned, nivolumab. How did you describe first the concept of immunotherapy to Ariella?
So this is about 5 years ago now, and yeah. So I think one thing that I tend to do, I take what I do quite seriously, but I tend to be a little goofy when I'm talking to patients, just because it's a stressful situation. So I can't recall exactly the extent of my, goofiness at the time and how I presented things to her. But in general, the approach that I take is to explain, or that I took and I still continue to take in the context of these kinds of immunotherapies, is to explain that we're not really targeting the cancer cells specifically. At least that's not what we think we're doing. The reality really is that in many ways we know something about what we're doing, but in many ways we also don't know some things about what we're doing. That's the nature of clinical trials in general. And so I explained that we are trying to positively affect the way the patient's immune system is interacting with their cancer. By positively affect, I mean to try to enable someone's own immune response to treat them and eradicate their disease.
Ariella, had you ever heard of immunotherapy before meeting with Dr. Lesokin, and what were your initial impressions of the idea?
That's a great question. So I had initially been pitched relative term on this trial during that hospital stay, right before I met Dr. Lesokin. Dr. Matazar, who is my primary oncologist, initially ran through the idea by me. He talked about how great Dr. Lesokin was and thought we'd be a good personality fit, which makes a lot of sense now. And he explained that it would help my immune system kind of fight back. But it wasn't until meeting with Dr. Lesokin and properly sitting down with him and going through some of his anecdotes and doing it in his particularly goofy way that I really grasped it and understood the potential that there was for it to help me. I think for me, when I had that conversation, I had been so used to a lot of chemotherapy drugs, a lot of things that were more of a shock and awe approach. So the idea that there is a drug that wouldn't be wiping out all my bodily systems and would in fact be helping my immune system do its own job and combat the cancer was really appealing to me. it's like, okay, I
Soakin,
get to be my own superhero.
how did you, so how do you explain what that is and how it works?
Was that a question to me?
Oh,
Yes,
sorry,
it was.
it cut out, so I missed that. Okay, go.
It was. How did you explain to Ariella what PD-1 checkpoint blockade is and how it works?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I generally, again, I'm going to say that I don't remember exactly how I explained it to Ariella because I've got a few gray hair, you can probably see here, and I get a little senile. So, but in principle, I mean, basically explained the concept that when immune cells become activated, specifically T cells, those are the cells that we think we are targeting with PD-1 blockade. So when T cells see an antigen, when they see what their target is, they generally display things on their surface that let the immune system and other cells around them know that they're activated, they've seen something, and that it's the job of the other tissue cells to basically inform the T cell whether they're good or bad, and they do that by either trying to trigger this PD-1 signal on T cells to sort of say, hey, I'm okay. And the purpose of PD-1 blockade is to interfere with this, hey, I'm okay signal. Because it turns out that cancers, and actually Hodgkin lymphoma is really an outlier in this space, but cancers can upregulate the triggers for PD-1. It's called PD-L1. And Hodgkin lymphoma is actually, as I said, it turns out, quite a major outlier here because it really uniformly, highly overexpresses this trigger of that on itself, this PD-L1 trigger that is a negative regulator of T cell response. So PD-1 really is something that interferes with that and allows for the immune cells to actually attack the cancer cells.
Ariella, if you were talking to a patient who is considering treatment with PD-1 blockade, how would you describe the therapy?
Yeah, I think I would describe the therapy as an opportunity to help your own immune system do the job it's designed to do. And that when you have cancer, and particularly if you have refractory cancer, such as what I had, your immune system gets beaten down. It gets beaten down and it gets tricked by the cancer cells that have various ways of avoiding detection, which prevents your immune system from finding them and killing them. So there's this drug that kind of gives you a little booster shot and lets your immune cells do a better job of finding, identifying, and attacking cancer cells without some of the quality of life hindrances that you might have with other drugs. So I would say it's an opportunity to have a protocol that gives you a quality of life and makes it easier to heal yourself and not have to worry about some of the side effects you might typically associate with a cancer drug, like nausea, weight loss, hair loss, things like that.
Is there anything, Ariella, that you now know about treatment with checkpoint blockade that you wish you had known at the very beginning, or something that you'd like to share with a patient who's considering treatment?
I think for me, and I know it's been 5 years out, so I think it's kind of difficult to tell now what the long-term impact will be, if any. But I think the way very thorough and in-depth approach that Dr. Lu Soakin and his team took with preparing me for the trial and checking in with me during the trial and during the follow-up phase gave me a good, it really helped set the table for me and helped me figure out what I should be looking out for in the future when it comes to things like side effects. So I feel pretty prepared, and I think it also helps that I've had a very like a smooth handoff and transition to following up with my primary oncologist. So I have this like safety net of sorts. So I know that, you know, if anything does happen with this drug, we will quickly be able to identify it and do something about it. And I'll have the full support of a Memorial Sloan Kettering team, whether that's on the immunotherapy side or lymphoma side of the house, working together to help. So I would say that it's really important to make sure that when you do select a clinical trial or select a drug, that you also are selecting the right care team for you, so that you can feel comfortable communicating your symptoms with them, so you can feel comfortable reaching out to them when you have a question or when things seem even slightly awry. The sooner that you can address something, the better.
So speaking of that, did you experience any side effects from treatment?
You know, I think for me, when I first came into this, not knowing what to expect, I was definitely expecting some of the traditional side effects that I'd had from different treatments. And when those didn't happen, I was like a little concerned. I was like, I'm not feeling nauseous. Does this mean it's not working? But I know I felt tired naturally. That was, I think, the first thing I noticed. There was definitely some fatigue there, just from, you know, feeling super weak as my baseline and commuting into the city, going to the treatment, being there, you know, for several hours and coming back. I think I had pneumonitis at one point, and there may have been some other minor side effects that we took in stride. And I think what was really neat about this particular experience, because I was one of the first people with lymphoma to receive this drug in this particular trial, we had a very a very collaborative approach to problem solving and figuring out what to do when symptoms came up and how to manage them. So I felt very empowered to participate in these decisions and figure out what was best for me and how we should continue the trial and how we should manage some of the minor bumps along the way.
So 5 years ago, 8 years ago, or 5 years ago, when you got treatment with this, the side effect profiles of checkpoint blockade weren't as well understood as they are today. So, Dr. Lu Soakin, a question to you. How do you bring up the topic of potential side effects, and what is it very important that a patient needs to know about side effects on immunotherapy?
Yeah, so I mean, I think with these kind of therapies, and PD-1 is one of them, it's certainly the most the furthest advanced in terms of development, and one that's had the most clinical efficacy to date. But it's one of a family of immune treatments, and in general, this family of treatments is designed to disinhibit the immune system. What Ariella was just talking about, where it gives you this kick or this boost, really it releases the brakes on the immune response. And the hope is that this allows the immune response to be refocused onto a patient's cancer. But there is potential, because we are interfering with sort of normal homeostatic mechanisms, like normal ways that your body regulates itself, that you will have an immune response against your own tissues and organs. And that can be quite diverse in its presentation. She mentioned a little bit of pneumonitis, which fortunately in her case was really a little bit. But we look out for and are very in tune with the idea that any organ is really an organ that your immune system surveys, and when we're interfering with these normal mechanisms of immune control, any organ can be affected. At the time when we were beginning this treatment, Arielle was actually the first patient I treated with Hodgkin lymphoma, or maybe the second. But anyway, she was definitely one of the first. We didn't know what the specific side effects might be. If there was potential here for specificity in the kinds of side effects that we might see in someone with her type of cancer, as opposed to somebody with, let's say melanoma or lung cancer or one of the other cancers where these drugs were being very actively investigated at that time. But we did have a general sense of what types of side effects exist, and a general sense, and actually a pretty good sense, for how to manage them together with the patient. And I think one of the key messages in my discussions with her and with essentially all the other patients that I see on these clinical studies is to kind of make sure to explain this concept that we are really, releasing the brakes and it's systemic. And to also make sure that patients are very well aware of how to reach us, very well aware that should anything happen that's a little bit abnormal, that it's always much better to give us a call, to let us know, to let us evaluate, even if it's just over the phone, what is happening, so that we could provide some guidance and or reassurance about, this is important, this is not important, etc. Because really, the one thing that we have seen, and I have the benefit of hindsight, is that the sooner we address any side effect, the less severe that side effect is.
Ariella, you mentioned earlier that it was important to choose the right care team. So that leads me to think it wasn't just Dr. Lu Soakin that you interacted with.
Not at all.
On this trial. Who were some of the other people that you interacted with while receiving treatment?
Sure. So for me, when I was going through treatment, I think there is an entire service design approach that Memorial Sloan Kettering takes when it comes to patients coming in, whether they're coming into the facility for the first time and meeting everyone, or they're an old patient that's coming in and meeting new folks. So from the very moment I walk through the door, the person that's the greeter, and then there's the person at the front desk, and there's folks working at reception that you come to know over time, and everyone is super friendly and welcoming and answers every question. There are also several nurses that I worked with through Dr. Lu Soakin that I could text if anything ever came up, folks that would always check in on me and really make me feel like anything that I had to share was worth discussing, and that I was empowered to identify when something may be slightly off. As Dr. Lu Soakin mentioned, being able to share those things with candor is really important. So I felt really grateful that I was able to have such a strong rapport with so many people on Dr. Lu Soakin's team, who really made me feel comfortable sharing these sometimes rather uncomfortable parts of your body when your body starts to kind of work against you. It's especially certain organs, it's kind of uncomfortable to talk about, and it's really important that you have people that you feel comfortable sharing those things with and that you can trust, and that won't make fun of you for saying that maybe you were going to shit your pants in the subway. These are things that you gotta feel really comfortable talking about.
As you do, you're clearly
as you do, So I would say that's.
You said when you started your treatment, you were expecting to experience some of the traditional side effects, and when you didn't, you became worried that the drug wasn't working. When did you know that something was happening, something good?
So I think what was really neat about this drug is that we noticed that things were working around the first scan. I remember going into that appointment after just having that scan, talking to Dr. Lu Soakin, and I think he was like, so, I think I have some good news for you. And very chill way that he does, where it's like, he's not gonna oversell it. He's not gonna overhype it. Just kind of sneaks in the good news, which I appreciated, because I think there was this approach where it's like, yes, we have this initial positive response, and that's great, but let's keep working, let's keep getting the drug, let's keep seeing how this will unfold. And that's the exact mindset that I adopted. While it was great to have that initial success, I had initial success in other drugs as well that ultimately ended up not panning out for me. So I think every time I came in to receive the results of a scan, the more confident I felt. And even now, like when I go in for follow-ups, I know it continues to work, because even now, 5 years later, going in for a scan, when I hear those results, I'm like, okay, still good. I think that's how I'm going to continue to operate as long as this keeps going. So.
So, Dr. Lesokhin, what was that experience like for you to see one of your first patients treated with checkpoint for lymphoma respond so well?
It was kind of incredible, actually. I think, as Ariella pointed out herself, when we first met, she was quite ill. I actually hadn't seen her stand up until maybe 2 or 3 weeks later. And I mean, to me, it was pretty apparent that something good was happening even before the scan. So, I mean, it was one of those remarkable kind of experiences that you always hope for when you're testing new drugs and doing early phase clinical studies. So nothing but good.
What's the was it a typical response that you've seen now in the following 5 years, or what's the percentage of Hodgkin lymphoma patients that respond to checkpoint blockade?
I think in follow-up studies, it's been around 65% of patients do respond. In this trial, it was 87%, which, it's a small trial, so it's hard to know. I think the follow-up larger numbers probably are more accurate. So it's a 65 to 70% of patients that do respond, which is really remarkable, because I think there's a lot of excitement around PD-1 blockade, but unfortunately, many other malignancies, the responses, although they're very durable, and they're not associated generally with a tremendous amount of standard chemotherapy-related side effects, as Arielle describes. But the responses are more in the 20 to 30% range. So really, Hodgkin lymphoma is quite an outlier. And I think it's in part because of this significant and relatively uniform abundance of this PD-L1 signal on malignant cells. So it's the biology of the actual malignancy that it turns out is what makes it so susceptible to this treatment. Although a priori we had no idea it was going to be that susceptible. But so
that's good news for patients. What happens when a patient doesn't respond? What's the next step after checkpoint therapy?
Yeah, so that's difficult, and I think this applies actually to many clinical trials. When patients don't respond, you basically you can't continue the study. That isn't providing any benefit, and so you have to look for alternative treatment approaches. And in the setting of post PD-1 therapy, I think in Hodgkin lymphoma, I think it's quite challenging in terms of what to do next. And it has to be really a patient-specific discussion and decision point, because there's a lot of things that go into that. What were the prior treatments to date? What's the current overall clinical status? How ill is the patient? And what are the available treatment options, both experimental and standard of care?
What actually is the actual FDA approval status of the drug that Ariella received? Is it given as a frontline therapy? Is it given following prior treatment?
It's given following prior treatment. It's approved for individuals that have received prior rituximab as well as prior stem cell transplant, autologous stem cell transplant. And there's a warning in terms of use of the drug around the time of allogeneic transplantation.
Can you describe what allogeneic transplantation is?
Something we discussed with Ariella a few times, actually.
Yes. Batted that off.
So, allogeneic transplantation is a, I would say, kind of an older form of immunotherapy, or maybe that's not quite accurate to say it's older, but it's basically when we match the tissue type of the patient to another individual, and then the patient receives, following some conditioning treatment, receives that other person's stem cells, inclusive of the immune cells that that individual has. And the idea is that the other patient's immune system is not tolerized to the recipient patient's malignancy, and can therefore see that cancer as a foreign, bad thing that needs to be removed. The downside is that that donors' stem cells and T cells, immune cells, can also see the recipient patient as not themselves, and attack the patient's organs as well. So
he's frozen.
Oh no.
We'll wait for his feed to kick back in. Ariella, at the time that I'm sure he'll come back into the room here, so let me just open that up so I can do that. At the time you received this therapy, you were pretty much well versed in what clinical trials are and kind of the things to consider about them. What would you say to someone who's never experienced a clinical trial? And in fact, we've met a lot of patients who don't even know what clinical trials are or that they exist as an option.
Sure. So some advice I would have for someone considering enrolling in a clinical trial is to think of it as, just as valid an option as any other protocol that's in the standard of care. And it's worth exploring with the support of your physician. I would recommend educating yourself about all the options available to you. There are a lot of experimental drugs out there, some that may be a better match for you and the current state of your life and your current health profile. I would recommend joining patient support groups, perhaps to get some anecdotal evidence around side effects and where people have received care. I would recommend going to clinicaltrials.gov. And I would really recommend sitting down with your physician and asking questions, as many questions as you can to feel comfortable. And I would also look at it as an opportunity to not only help yourself and finding a treatment that might work for you that you haven't explored before, but you're also really helping so many other patients out there who may potentially benefit from this drug once it comes to market. And you're helping to move science forward. Now I think Brian's frozen.
now it's frozen.
Oh no! Now we get to run the show, so that's cool.
Right. Well, I would second everything you've said. I would also say that it's important for people to recognize that there are different kinds of clinical studies. There are the types of clinical studies where a new drug is being tested to identify a safe dose, and so this is a phase 1 study. And then there are studies that where drugs are where a safe dose has already been identified, and one asks, does this drug have any effect in this disease that's potentially meaningful relative to historical experience? That's typically a phase 2 trial. And then there's the gold standard phase 3 trials where one evaluates whether your candidate drug is better than the standard of care in some form. So all of these different trials have different pros and cons. I think they're all very, very important for the development of new treatments for patients. And I think all patients should consider them as an option, as Ariella noted, that can be used in addition to standard of care treatment approaches.
Thank you. I was just about to ask. You two have a great rapport. It's obvious that you have a great doctor-patient relationship. Ariella, is that a consequence of being on a trial and working, staying in that trial and on study and going back for these scans? Or is this atypical of the experience that you had with other oncologists who treated you?
I think, I mean, obviously, Dr. Soakin is the man. It is known. No, I mean, I think I've gotten really, really lucky, having spoken to, dozens of other patients that have been other treatment facilities across the U.S. and around the world. I think Memorial Sloan Kettering hires great people. Dr. Lu Soakin being one of them, and Dr. Matazar, my primary oncologist, being another. And I think that's really spoiled me. I think I've really, my view has been colored by them and the wonderful experiences I've had with both of them and their teams. I think Dr. Lu Soakin and I were also able to develop such a great rapport because, he helped me during such a difficult time in my life, and had the exact right temperament that I needed after, going through so many different protocols, feeling very discouraged, and kind of felt like, some of these promising drugs just weren't going to ever work for me. He kind of came in there and was like, yeah, let's try it. Like, why not? Let's give it a go. Let's see. I think that was exactly what I needed at that point in time. And he really met me where I was, on my sickest days or on my healthiest days, on my saddest days and on my happiest days. And I think that's really how we were able to develop such a strong relationship, that I didn't feel like I had to, pretend to be anyone else when I walked in that room with him or with his team. I could be myself and share whatever experience I had with the drug, good, bad, ugly. And, they were going to coach me through it.
That's fantastic. We are almost out of time, and I wanted to give the viewers an opportunity to ask questions. So if you're watching this, you should see a Q&A box on your screen, and you can type a question into that, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. We have a question from Cynthia saying that she's been off immunotherapy for 10 months. Did you have, Ariella, any late side effects after your treatment with nivolumab?
Let me think. I don't believe I did, but that was definitely something that we, closely watched and guarded against. I think for me, I think the fatigue, which could have just been a result of the cumulative side effects of all these different treatments that I had had, and some of the scar tissue in my system, other remnants of the lymphoma in my body, that contributed to this. So I think those were things that impacted, my ability to live a full life initially. But I do think that, as I moved off the therapy and continued to have follow-up treatments and continued to monitor, I started to feel more and more comfortable. I started to, have the trappings of a normal life. Started working, moved out of my parents' house, and started to develop some more independence. So, we're still watching, certainly, and I have them on speed dial if in the event that anything weird happens. So that makes me feel really comfortable knowing that I have that in my back pocket.
Good. Dr. Lu Soakin, is immunotherapy, this is more a general immunotherapy question, is immunotherapy being used as a first-line therapy for any cancers at this time?
Yeah, actually, it's approved as a first-line therapy for melanoma. Actually, combination immunotherapy is approved in this form, the combination of PD-1 and CTLA-4 blockade. It's also approved as a first-line in lung cancer. And it's being investigated in Hodgkin lymphoma earlier in the disease natural history as well.
We have another question from Cynthia. What, of the other patients that participated in Ariella's trial, what's the percentage of those that are also 5-year survivors?
Yeah, this data needs to be updated, actually. I don't know that answer. Okay. Hopefully it'll be soon. I would say that of the patients that I treated, the Areola is not alone.
We have a question from Rada. What was the informed consent process like? How long did it take? Did you understand what you were being given, Ariella?
That's a fantastic question.
Oh my God. Yeah, that's a great question. So if anyone that's gone through any type of clinical trial or has heard of them, just to give some background, typically it's just like a stack of papers written in 12 points Times New Roman font. And you're typically not in a mental state to go through however many pages there are and properly understand line by line what to expect and what's going to happen to you. The nice part was with Dr. Lu Soakin's team, and I remember one of the first nurses I worked with, sat with me and kind of went through all the pages with me and paused and let me ask questions and kind of explain things in layman's terms, and made me feel a bit more in control of the situation. It let me know that there are certain choices, like there are certain things I could sign off on and other things I did not have to sign off on. She let me know what was optional and what was required, depending on how I was feeling and my particular schedule and that I was in that point in time of my life. So that felt really good, knowing that I had the information in front of me. There were some choices that I could make, and that I was going into this with open eyes. I will say, ultimately, when I was starting this trial and going deciding to participate in receiving this drug, there were no other options available to me in that point in time. So I was going to run with it probably regardless, to be honest with you. I was willing to accept that risk at that point in time in my life. I know I was young. I wanted to exhaust all options available to me, and whatever side effects that came, I just had this mindset that eventually science will catch up to helping me deal with that side effect if there wasn't something available then, and that I'd be lucky to live long enough to experience those side effects and deal with them as a normal person. So it's not the mindset that everyone is going to be in when they're going into a clinical trial, and it's not the best approach for everyone in that phase of their life, but that was the decision I made, and that was like the cost benefit analysis that I made going into it.
Dr. Lu Soakin, we've talked a lot about the particular drug that Ariella received, but there are actually a total of 5 approved drugs that work on that same pathway, that PD-1 pathway.
Yes.
And we have a question from Bob about differences. Do they work differently? Do they have different side effects, or are they better in some cancers than others?
Sure. So certainly they are better in some cancers than others. We sort of touched on it, the fact that in Hodgkin lymphoma it's really quite a bit of an outlier in terms of its efficacy. In terms of the different agents, I think they all sort of target the same pathway, the same interaction. There probably are subtle differences between them, but I think they're subtle. I think in general, if the biology of the way a patient's immune system is interacting with their cancer is in part related to this pathway, then interfering with this with PD-1 with any one of these agents is may be effective and potentially is worth investigating.
Thank you. And we have time for one more question. This one is from Gina, and she's asking about when you're diagnosed with cancer and you're asked for a biopsy where they take tumor tissue out of you. Should you request? Do you need to specifically request that tissue be sent for typing, genetic typing, to get a better understanding of the tumor and whether or not you can see signals of likelihood that a person's going to respond to therapy or not? Or is this something that's just done as a matter of course? I'll throw that at Dr. Lu Soakin.
I don't know to what extent it's done as a matter of course. Here it generally is. I think that is an incredibly valuable and very important thing to do, because we know that one of the mechanisms by which individuals respond is through the presence of mutations within their cancer. Mutations being changes in the DNA that affect the things the cancer cell presents, and these things are so-called neoantigens. And the more mutations someone has, the more likely it is that they have a relevant molecule, a relevant change in their genetics that allows for better presentation and for immune recognition to occur. And it's actually been shown in now several translational studies that the quantity of mutations that a cancer has is related to responsiveness to this disease. And the FDA has recognized that because they have allowed for the use of one of these agents in patients with something called mismatch repair deficiency. And this is a type of malignancy that has many mutations and is very likely to respond to these agents. And so that's kind of the first biomarker, if you will, that is disease agnostic. So anyone with this mismatch repair deficiency, irrespective of the kind of malignancy they have, is eligible to receive anti-PD therapy.
Do you see this kind of mutation in breast cancer?
You see it.
No, you're not a breast cancer.
I'm not a breast cancer specialist, so I couldn't tell you what the frequency is. I think this is a type of mutational profile that has been best characterized in colon cancer. It is present in some gynecological malignancies. I don't know off the top of my head if there's a rate of presence for this mutation, of this deficiency in breast cancer, but I would guess that there probably is. But that's a guess. I don't know.
One of the other things that pathologists look at, and immunologists, is the amount of T cells that have already infiltrated a tumor, and that is increasingly becoming a reliable indicator of the likelihood of someone responding to therapy. Anything to say about that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's, this tumor mutation burden. Mismatch repair deficient tumors have a higher tumor mutation burden. It's presence of an immune infiltrate, a T-cell infiltrate, a sort of so-called hot tumor, inflamed tumor, that seems to be associated with efficacy of these therapies. And also presence of this marker PD-L1, which is in a way a marker of an inflamed tumor microenvironment.
Mm-hmm. All right, Ariella, I will let you get the last word, and then we'll wrap up. Any parting words for the patients and caregivers who are watching today's webinar?
Sure. So first of all, just thank you so much, everyone, for listening in. I just want to add that, you are your own best advocate. We talk about that a lot, but ultimately, you are an expert in your own life, in your own health. And only you can provide the crucial data and insights into what it's like to live with this illness and treatment day in, day out. And providing the information to your physician is crucial to make sure that you have a positive outcome. The more transparent and forthright that you can be, the better, the better treatment options you'll have that are tailored to you. I'm incredibly lucky that I got to work with someone like Dr. Lesokhin and his team, who really enabled me to help make these decisions and participate in my own care plan. And I would encourage you all to do so and to explore these options as they come up, to educate yourselves, to inform yourselves and arm yourself with that information, and be prepared to ask as many questions as you can, and to take care of yourselves as best you can. And thank you again. And I'm happy to be here in this position today. And I'm happy to be alive to, see all these wonderful, drug discoveries that have come up, and to see the success of all this research. And I'm looking forward to the future, to seeing what options we have available for all of us patients, and see what we can, what future we can make together.
Ariella, is there a way for any of our viewers to contact you? Are you on social media, or is there any handle you care to share?
Sure. Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Cruella_Chivil. Feel free to shoot me a note.
That's wonderful. Well, I want to thank all the viewers for submitting the questions. I hope that you found today's webinar insightful and that it helps guide you or a loved one in discussing immunotherapy options with an oncologist. Once again, I'd like to thank our generous sponsors for making this webinar series possible. And remind you all that you can view this and all of our other past webinars at cancerresearch.org/webinars. Ariella, Dr. Lu Soakin, thank you so much for joining us, and thank all of you for watching.
Thank you. It's been an honor.
Thank you.